part of the Baroque movement, these paintings depict a young woman, Judith, slaying a man in his bed, Holofernez. Both paintings have the same subject, but couldn't be more different. But first, the story behind these paintings. Judith, a young widow from the Jewish city of Bethula, set out on a mission to kill the head of the Assyrian army that had besieged her city. Dressed in her finest garments, she entered the enemy camp with the intent of talking to Holofernez. Her beauty, striking enough for the man to invite her to dine, and he let his guard down. Judith seized the opportunity, sword in hand, and slayed the man in front of her, saving her city. Interesting fact is that by both Jewish and Protestant traditions, this text is considered apocryphal, meaning that it is not considered canonical or true, but instead this story is just that, a story. There's still more background to cover before truly looking into the two paintings side by side. The two artists, Artemisia and Caravaggio, knew each other through Artemisia's father, with Caravaggio being his friend. Knowing that Caravaggio made his paintings first tells the viewer that Artemisia was inspired by the artist and some might say improved upon his work. The most interesting fact about Artemisia is that she was a woman. In her time, women just weren't artists. That was typically a man's job, but her father helped her channel her artistic abilities. Now these two paintings were both made by Artemisia, with the cooler toned one being the first iteration. Looking at the final piece, a viewer can tell that it looks more finished than the first. Not only that, but looking closely at the folds of Judith's sleeves and the shadows of the mattress, along with the maid's headscarf and tattered clothes being more accurate to the time the story took place. Finally, looking at the two paintings side by side shows some obvious differences. The most obvious being that Judith has the help of a maid holding him down in Artemisia's painting, while in Caravaggio's it has an older woman looking on, not doing anything. We're going to call the different people in paintings A and C for the names of the painters, and for my sanity. Looking closely at Judith C's face, she's either disgusted or confused about what's going on, along with her other hand barely being on his head, making her very detached from the situation, while Judith A has a determined look, along with bracing herself on the bed with her leg and having her hand over her face. This shows that Judith A is a lot more determined to save her people than Judith C is. Now Holofernez C has more defined muscles and more awareness of what is happening in this situation, making it easier to sympathize and feel bad for the man in this situation, because why would a random young lady be killing an attractive man in his bed? While Holofernez A does have an obvious strong build, it isn't a highlight of this painting. His face also shows a more lifeless impression, turned away from Judith. His less glorious depiction, along with both of the women trying to kill the man, makes an unknowing viewer less sympathetic and more curious about the full picture, rather than just thinking about Holofernez. The difference in lighting makes painting C give the scene a more dramatic feel, while painting A has warmer lighting, giving a more realistic feel. Maybe a candle illuminates the room instead of just some mysterious overhead light. It becomes a bigger point when you consider that it was frowned upon for women to be depicted in an unappealing way at the time. Artemisia, being a woman, already broke norms by painting, so why not be a bit more crude than what was normal? If you look at Judith A's face, again, she has a gross expression and even a natural double chin while looking down Holofernez. If you look at her hand, the creases are visible, showing the strength she has to hold the head of an army down. Not the daintiness that was typical of women of the time that this was painted. Even the blood spatter is different, with Caravaggio's being like yarn protruding from his neck, while Artemisia's blood splatter looks realistic. A viewer could be disturbed by the blood spraying up from the artery and flooding down the sheets. All of the characteristics in Artemisia's work make it so much more striking, and if it wasn't clear by now, her painting is my favorite of the two, but even so, Caravaggio is a talented artist who has made amazing works of art. Who is this artist? This woman's name is Artemisia. She started painting in 1610 when she was 17. She made people upset by this because she was a woman. Women weren't supposed to be artists. That was a man's job. A lot of her art reflected that, depicting women composing music, taking an ungraceful snooze, and just doing things they weren't supposed to. What does this art mean? Artemisia's work gives a refreshingly realistic look to a graphic and serious situation. Her art is a recreation of Caravaggio's. Already knowing that some people wouldn't like her art due to her gender, she put other things into the painting to upset what was normal. What this tells artists today is to challenge what you know. Do something different. What does her art mean? Specifically, Artemisia's paintings mean that one person's art doesn't have to pertain to everyone. Her paintings, in general, were a challenge to what was normal, saying a lot about how women were treated at the time, having women look beautiful at every moment and glorifying sad and awful moments. Why do we care about her work? People should care about her work because it shows a glimpse into what being a female painter was like in the 1600s, and how women were depicted in artwork, being perfect and dainty even if they were doing something as gruesome as killing a man. Artemisia's work is important to appreciate because her work was a challenge to what we know was typical of the period. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Oh, it's so much faster. The interesting fact is that by both Jewish and Protestant... Oh. The interesting... Oh. There is still more to cover before... Oh my god. These two paintings were both made by Artemisia with the cooler... Oh. Oh. Holding hands. Ancient lesbians. I need a drink of water. My mouth is dry. The nurse, making it easier to sympathize. It becomes a bigger point when you consider that it was frowned upon for women. I promise you, English is my first language. And the only language I know. Really, don't look at my Spanish grade. Not the daintiness that was typical for men. Dainty men? What? Of the time this was painting. Sewing. What? Can I English, please? Caravaggio's being like yarn protruding. A viewer could be Oh, please.